George Washington was the first president of the United States, right? Well, kind of.
What if the story of America was not the one you knew?
The first president of the Continental Congress, Peyton Randolph of Virginia, was elected in 1774. Randolph was connected. He was a good friend of George Washington and a first cousin once removed of Thomas Jefferson. Interestingly, Jefferson didn't consider Randolph fit for leadership, saying, "He was indeed a most excellent man, but heavy and inert in body. He was rather too indolent and careless for business." Randolph was an important addition to Congress because of his reputation as a political moderate. Randolph served in the Continental Congress 3 times between 1774 and 1775 and was president twice. He died in Philadelphia the night after a congressional meeting. Congress paused their proceedings to show the respect at his funeral. Like Randolph, the Continental Congress's second president wasn't particularly radical. South Carolina's Henry Middleton was a planter with vast land holdings and around 800 slaves. He was rich enough to pay for an entire Revolutionary regiment. Middleton married 3 times, gaining land and political connections with each marriage. Middleton was president of the Continental Congress for less than a month in 1774. Most importantly, he signed Congress's Declaration of Rights and Grievances, formalizing the idea that American colonists were equal to any other British citizen and shouldn't be taxed without parliamentary representation.
Does the government of King George have the right to tax the citizens of Boston when they are denied representation in the Parliament of Westminster?
Afterward, Middleton resigned from Congress because he opposed American independence, and when the British captured Charleston, he invoked their protection. But Middleton wasn't punished by the U.S. government after the war, probably because of his financial contributions to the Revolutionary movement. John Hancock is better known for his famous signature than for being the president of the Continental Congress, but the two things are related. Hancock was president when the Declaration of Independence was written and signed. The earliest copy includes only his name and that of the congressional secretary. Signing it was Hancock's duty as president and a dangerous, treasonous act.
Signing this thing, you could end up being hung. I mean, signing this thing was treasonous.
Hancock is widely recognized as the first signer of the more famous copy of the Declaration, which includes 56 signatures. Supposedly, when he signed, he said, "There, John Bull can read my name without spectacles. He may double his reward, and I put his at defiance." John Bull was a fictional representation of England. In other versions of the story, a defiant Hancock wanted the king to be able to read his signature. Henry Laurens may be better known these days as the father of Hamilton hero John Laurens, but he was just as prominent a member of the Revolution as his son. Like Henry Middleton, he was from Charleston, South Carolina, a planter and a slave owner. His import-export business became so successful that he expanded into slave trading. Initially, he was a moderate and encouraged passive resistance, but this attitude didn't stop him from being critical of British interference in the colonial economy when, as a merchant, he stood to lose. Laurens was president of the Continental Congress in 1777 and later became ambassador of Holland. On his way there to negotiate an alliance, he was captured by the British and documents in his possession were seized. One of these provoked England to declare war on Holland. Laurens was held in the infamous Tower of London for more than a year under severe conditions until the U.S. traded British General Lord Cornwallis for his release. While in the Tower, the British offered Laurens a pardon if he would admit fighting for the rebels was wrong. Laurens declined, saying, "I am afraid of no consequences but such as would flow from dishonorable acts." John Jay has another claim to fame besides his Continental Congress presidency, including being the first Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. In fact, George Washington reportedly offered Jay first pick of cabinet positions. He held an impressive array of offices during his political career. He helped negotiate 2 major treaties, the Treaty of Paris that expanded American territory and the Jay Treaty, which established peace with Great Britain. Jay wrote some of the Federalist Papers explaining and defending the U.S. Constitution. In them, he warned against foreign influence and lack of national unity, writing, "A band of brethren united to each other by the strongest ties should never be split into a number of unsocial, jealous, and alien sovereignties." John Adams declared Jay the most important of the Founding Fathers, but he's less well known than many. This may be because of his quiet nature or because he was absent at the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Despite his retiring personality, in 1776, Jay established the first American counterintelligence agency.
The origins of U.S. intelligence dates to the founding of the Republic. In a sense, espionage is as American as cherry pie.
It was a combination of politicians and military men, and its activities were top secret. They did, however, foil an assassination plot against Washington. Samuel Huntington is sometimes called the first U.S. president. He He was president of the Continental Congress in 1781 when the Articles of Confederation were established. Since the Articles contain the first written reference to the United States, some believe Huntington deserves the title over George Washington. Huntington was a member of the Revolutionary Congresses for 8 years and president for 2. He held multiple political positions before the war and afterward was Connecticut's first governor and chief justice. One of the tensest moments of his governorship was Shays' Rebellion, a Massachusetts uprising over the post-Revolutionary War economy. When the governor of Massachusetts wrote Huntington asking for help suppressing the insurgents, Huntington sent soldiers and pledged Connecticut's support. Thomas McKean held office in 2 states at once. He was one of the new state of Delaware's delegates to the Continental Congress while serving as Chief Justice in Pennsylvania. McKean went back and forth in many aspects of life, including switching political parties multiple times. Nonetheless, he later became governor of Pennsylvania and briefly served as president of Delaware, the equivalent of governor, when its president was captured during the war. McKean signed the Declaration of Independence, although apparently he couldn't actually remember when he signed the document. In the midst of all this, McKean served in the war and wrote letters to his wife about the harrowing experience, saying, "I really wish to be rid of all public employments." Nevertheless, he returned to the Continental Congress and was president when the British surrendered at Yorktown, ending the American Revolution. John Hanson is also sometimes considered the first president of the United States because, as first president of the Confederation Congress, he was the first to act under the laws of the Articles of Confederation, a precursor to the U.S. Constitution. However, at this point, the president was still part of the legislature, not an independent position. The 2 roles wouldn't be separated until the Constitution was ratified in 1789, about 9 years after Hanson's tenure as president ended. Hanson was part of Maryland's revolutionary government, which wrested state control from the British. In 1776, Maryland was the last state to consent to independence, holding out until Hanson gave an impassioned speech to the Maryland Convention saying, "These resolutions ought to be passed, and it is high time." Hanson's speech turned the tide. The resolutions were passed a week later. Elias Boudinot, 9th president of the American Congresses, was from Philadelphia, but in the Continental Congress, he represented New Jersey. Boudinot was an ardent Christian. He wrote and published The Age of Revelation in opposition to the writings of Thomas Paine, whom he called an infidel author. Interestingly, in this work, Boudinot declared that laws should evolve, writing, "There is no other instance than that of the 10 Commandments of a body of laws being produced at once and remaining without addition afterwards." Late in life, Boudinot was president of the American Bible Society, which brought him into contact with the young Cherokee leader Galagina. Highly impressed with Boudinot, Galagina took his name. From then on, he was known as Elias Boudinot. Thomas Mifflin's early career was marked by a scandal. In 1775, he became one of George Washington's aides and was quickly promoted to quartermaster general. In this position, he made sure soldiers received their uniforms and equipment. Mifflin mismanaged the quartermaster department finances. Worse still, he plotted to replace Washington with Horatio Gates as commander of the troops. He was investigated for misconduct and had to resign in 1779. But that didn't prevent Mifflin from serving in the Confederation Congress or being elected president in late 1783. Ironically, in this role, he accepted Washington's resignation as commander at the war's end. Mifflin oversaw the ratification of the Treaty of Paris, which established peace between the U.S. and Britain. He would go on to be Pennsylvania's first governor. Richard Henry Lee belonged to one of Virginia's most powerful families. He and his brother Francis Lee held many different political positions in the state. Before the war, they made waves and enemies in the House of Burgesses. Later, they did the same in the Continental Congress. Allied with John and Samuel Adams, the Lees clashed with Silas Deane of Connecticut, whom they accused of using political clout to advance his business interests. Richard Lee wrote to then-President Henry Laurens asking that Deane be investigated, saying, "There is so much rottenness at the bottom and in every part of their system." The resulting feud led to both Laurens and Lee's resignations. Before all that, though, it was Richard who proposed the historic resolution to the Continental Congress.
Order, resolved that these united colonies are, and of a right ought to be, free and independent states.
Years later, he joined the Confederation Congress and became its president from November 1784 to November 1785. Nathaniel Gorham started turning heads during the Revolution because of his work on Massachusetts' Board of War, helping defend the state's coast and supporting military expeditions into Canada. This earned him a place as a delegate to the Confederation Congress, where he eventually became president. Having contributed to the writing of Massachusetts' Constitution, he was appointed to the National Constitutional Convention, where he advocated for a strong central government. Gorham was congressional president during Shays' Rebellion and had seen how helpless the national government was, relying on state militias to crush it. He thought things would only get worse without a strong executive. That's why he proposed making the King of Prussia King of the Americas as well. Unsurprisingly, not a popular or successful plan. He was nonetheless optimistic about George Washington as a leader, writing to him that the unanimous call you have received from your country may be an event conducive to the welfare of the people and of happiness and honor to yourself. Like Thomas Mifflin, Arthur St. Clair was one of George Washington's aides during the Revolutionary War. Washington became a fan after St. Clair's advice helped him win a battle at Princeton, New Jersey. But St. Clair made plenty of military blunders later and ended up on trial several times, including when he lost Fort Ticonderoga, a strategic location American forces had captured in the early days of the war. St. Clair was court-martialed for abandoning the fort, but Washington still defended him. St. Clair was the Confederation Congress president in 1787, after which the Congress named him governor of the Northwest Territory. In that capacity, he tried to remove Native Americans from the region. This led to a major military defeat where he lost more than 900 men. St. Clair lost Washington's support at that point, with Washington saying, "He's worse than a murderer. The blood of the slain is upon him." St. Clair defended his actions and was ultimately exonerated, but resigned from Congress at Washington's request. Surprisingly, though, he stayed governor of the territory. Cyrus Griffin was the last president of the Confederation Congress before the Articles of Confederation were replaced by the U.S. Constitution, but he wasn't originally in favor of American independence. In 1775, he wrote a plan of reconciliation for Britain and the colonies, saying, "I am convinced that a plan of this sort is the only way to bring about a happy and permanent accommodation." By 1778, Griffin was a member of the Continental Congress. He left it in 1780 to become a judge, but returned and became president about 8 years later. One of the most interesting episodes of Griffin's life had nothing to do with politics. While studying law at the University of Edinburgh, he met the daughter of a Scottish earl and they eloped. When he returned to England a few years later, it wasn't to deliver his reconciliation proposal. It was to make sure he got his fair share of the earl's inheritance.